Y'all ever heard something that made your blood run backwards? Not just scared you, but made you question what's real and what ain't. I'm Sheriff Claude Thibodeau, been keeping the peace in Terrebonne Parish for 32 years. Seen my share of strange down here in the bayou. Gators that walk upright, lights that dance in the swamp, folks who practice the old ways. But nothing prepared me for what we found in the summer of 2019. If you're watching this from Louisiana, especially round the Atchafalaya Basin, you might want to check your phone right now. See if you got any recordings you don't remember making. Voice memos, videos, anything. 'Cause what happened here, it's still happening. Drop a comment. Ever recorded something in your sleep? Ever found audio on your phone you know you didn't make? That's how it started for us. That's how they all started. My name's Claude Thibodeau, and this is the story of the Bayou recordings. The story the state police don't want told. The story of how 17 people disappeared into the swamp, but their voices kept calling home. Terrebonne Parish in July is hell's own sauna. Humidity so thick you could swim through the air, mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds, and heat that makes you forget what cold ever felt like. I'd been sheriff here since 1987, took over from my daddy who'd held the position for 20 years before that. The Thibodeau family had been lawmen in these parts since Reconstruction, and we knew every family, every feud, every secret that floated through the cypress trees and Spanish moss. But on July 15th, 2019, something new floated into my jurisdiction. Something that would change how I looked at the swamp I'd grown up in, the waters I'd fished since I was knee-high to a crawfish. It started with a phone call from Marie Guidry, a widow who lived on the edge of the Manchac swamp. Marie was tough as gator hide, raised 7 kids alone after her husband died in an oil rig accident. Not the type to spook easy. "Claude," she said, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. "You need to come out here. I found something. Something that ain't right." "What kind of something, Marie?" "It's my grandson, Tyler. He's been gone 3 days, you know that. But Claude, his phone was on my porch this morning, just sitting there like someone placed it gentle as you please. And there's recordings on it, new recordings, from after he went missing." I drove out to Marie's place, taking the old highway that runs alongside the levee. The Spanish moss hung heavy from the cypress trees, and the air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and decay. Marie lived in one of those old Acadian houses, raised up on stilts to keep the floodwaters at bay, painted that particular shade of blue that's supposed to keep the haints away. She was waiting on the porch, Tyler's phone in her weathered hands like it might bite her. Tyler was 19, good kid, worked on the shrimp boats during the season. He'd gone out frog gigging with some friends 3 nights back and never came home. We'd been searching the bayous, but in that maze of waterways, finding someone who doesn't want to be found, or can't be found, is like finding a specific drop of water in the Gulf. "Listen to this," Marie said, handing me the phone. Her hands shook as she pressed play on a voice memo dated July 14th, 2:47 a.m., a full day after Tyler disappeared. The audio started with static, like old AM radio, then cleared. It was Tyler's voice, but different. Flat. Mechanical almost, but still undeniably him. "Ma, don't come looking. We're walking the old paths now. The ones beneath the water, beneath the mud, beneath time. The singing woman showed us the way. She's been calling us home since before the French came, before the Homa, before anyone. We're recording everything so you'll understand. So you'll know we didn't leave. We just went deeper." Then the really unsettling part. In the background, you could hear other voices. Singing, but not in any language I recognized. Not French, not English, not the Homa tongue some of the old folks still spoke. It was older, full of sounds human throats shouldn't be able to make, and underneath it all the sound of water. Not splashing or flowing, but breathing. like the swamp itself was inhaling and exhaling. "There's more," Marie said. 12 more recordings, each one stranger than the last. I spent the next 2 hours listening to all of them. Tyler's voice describing places that didn't exist, cities beneath the bayou, roads made of cypress root and Spanish moss, markets where the vendors had been selling the same goods since before Louisiana was sold. And always, that singing in the background. "Marie, I need to take this phone. Evidence." She nodded, relief clear on her face. "Claude, what's happened to my grandson?" I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense, anyway. Back at the station, I had my deputy, Beau Melançon, pull up everything we had on missing persons in the parish over the last month. What we found made my blood chill despite the heat. 17 people missing in the last 30 days, ages 15 to 43. No connection between them that we could see. Different races, different economic backgrounds, different parts of the parish. But when we started calling their families, a pattern emerged. Every single one of them had left behind recordings. Amy Dupuis, 22, college student home for summer. Her phone was found in her abandoned car near Bayou Black. 37 voice memos recorded over the course of a week after she disappeared. Her voice describing a woman made of moss and moonlight who sang the old songs, the ones that made the gators dance and the dead wake up to listen. Robert Hebert, 35, offshore worker on his 2 weeks off. His wife found his phone in their mailbox 5 days after he vanished. The recordings were different. Him talking about walking through the bayou but being dry, breathing water like air, seeing the ghosts of everyone who'd ever drowned in these waters, and they were all heading in the same direction, following the song. Josephine Arsenault, 15, straight-A student from the good side of Houma. Her recordings were the worst, not because of what she said, but because of how happy she sounded, describing being pulled under the water, held down until her lungs filled, then breathing for the first time. Really breathing. Said the air had been poison all along. That water was what we were meant to inhale. I called in state police support, thinking maybe we had a cult situation. Maybe someone was drugging these people, making them hallucinate. Then, what? Keeping them somewhere? Killing them? But the recordings kept coming. New ones, on the phones we'd already collected as evidence. Phones that were locked in our evidence room, that had no signal, no battery power even. But every morning there'd be new recordings. Tyler's voice explaining the economics of the underwater markets, how they traded in years instead of dollars. Amy describing the architecture of sunken plantation houses, where the families still held their balls, dancing to music that had been playing continuously since 1793. Robert listing the names of every person who'd drowned in Terrebonne Parish since 1805, saying he'd met them all, that they were waiting for the rest of us to join them. The FBI sent 2 agents from New Orleans, Special Agents James Donnelly and Maria Santos. City folks who looked at our swamps like they were alien landscapes. They brought in tech experts, brought in cult specialists, even brought in a linguistics professor to analyze the singing and the backgrounds of the recordings. Sheriff Thibodeau, Agent Donnelly said after 3 days of investigation, "We've analyzed the audio extensively. These recordings are not being made by the missing persons." Come again? The voice patterns are perfect matches, but there are artifacts in the audio that suggest they're being synthesized. Someone with very sophisticated equipment is creating these recordings using voice samples from the missing persons. "That's impossible," I said. "Some of these folks barely ever recorded themselves talking. Where would someone get voice samples?" Agent Santos pulled up something on her laptop. "Every single missing person used the same app, Cajun Connect. It's a local social media platform, very popular in southern Louisiana. Voice messages are a primary feature." "So someone's using their voice messages to fake these recordings?" That's our working theory. Someone with access to the app's servers, technical expertise, and a very specific agenda. But that theory fell apart the next day when Josephine Arsenault walked out of the swamp. She was found by an early morning fisherman standing waist-deep in the water about a mile from where she'd disappeared. She was unharmed physically. Not a scratch on her, despite having been missing for 2 weeks in the swamp. But she was different. Wrong. Her mama brought her to the station, begging us to help. Josephine wouldn't speak at first, just stared at us with eyes that didn't seem to focus on anything in the room. When she finally did talk, her voice was exactly like it had been in the recordings. Flat, emotionless, but somehow still conveying information. "I need to go back," she said. "The recording isn't finished." "What recording, Cher?" I asked, using the gentle tone I'd use with a spooked child. "The true history, the real story of this place. Before your maps, before your names for things. The singing woman needs us to record it all before the water rises again, before the next erasure." "Who's the singing woman?" Josephine smiled then, and it was the most unsettling thing I'd seen in 3 decades of law enforcement. Not evil, not malicious, just empty. Like she was mimicking an expression she'd seen but didn't understand. "She's been here the longest, since before the land and water separated. She remembers when this was all one thing, not solid, not liquid, just potential. She's collecting the stories before they're lost. We're her recording devices now." The FBI agents wanted to take Josephine for psychological evaluation, but her mama refused. Took her home instead, said she'd rather have her daughter broken than taken away. But that night, Josephine disappeared again. Her mother found her bed empty, window open, and a new recording on her phone. The collection continues. We are almost complete. 17 voices for 17 floods. When the last story is recorded, the water will remember how to rise. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with a kidnapper or a cult. We were dealing with something that had been in these bayous longer than any of us. Something that didn't see taking people as wrong because it didn't see people as separate from the swamp itself. I went to see my grand-mère, Eulalie Thibodeau, 93 years old, and keeper of the old stories. She lived in a cabin deep in the swamp, only accessible by pirogue, surrounded by bottles hung from trees and crosses made of marsh grass. "Grand-mère," I said, "tell me about the singing woman." She looked at me for a long moment, then spat tobacco juice into an old coffee can. "You finally ready to hear what you've been ignoring your whole life, Claude? People are missing, 17 of them." 17? Her eyes widened. "Mon Dieu, it's time then. The collection." She told me a story I'd never heard, not in all my years growing up in these waters. About something that existed before the Native Americans, before any humans. Something that sang the land into being, sang the water into separating from the sky. But every few generations, it needed to renew the song, to record it in new voices before the old ones faded completely. "Last time was 1947, she said. 17 folks went missing then too, but they came back after. Different but back. They lived their lives, had families. Your grand-père was one of them." I stared at her. My grandfather, who'd been sheriff before my daddy, who died when I was 10. I remembered him as quiet, always humming something under his breath, always staring at the water like he was watching for something. He never told the whole truth about what happened during those 3 weeks he was gone, Grand-mère continued. But he left recordings, hidden them in the old evidence room at the sheriff's station, said someone would need them when it happened again. I drove back to the station that night with Grand-mère's words echoing in my head. The evidence room was in the basement, a damp, musty space that flooded every few years despite our best efforts. We'd moved most everything important upstairs decades ago, but the old files, the cases from the 40s and 50s, they were still down there, moldering in filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in my lifetime. Bo helped me search through the rust and rot, looking for anything from 1947. The FBI agents had gone back to New Orleans for the night, promising to return with more resources, more experts. But I had a feeling we'd find more answers in these old files than in any modern database. We found it in a cabinet marked Property Damage, 1947 of all things. A box wrapped in oilcloth, hidden behind routine insurance claims and storm damage reports. Inside were 7 wax cylinder recordings, the kind from old Edison phonographs, and a journal written in my grandfather's tight, careful script. The journal's first entry was dated September 3rd, 1947. They've started returning, one by one, walking out of the bayou like they never left. But they are changed. Their eyes see too much. They speak of things that haven't happened yet, remember things from before they were born. The singing continues in their heads, they say. Always the singing. Bo found an old phonograph in the Historical Society's storage. Terrebonne Parish had a small museum that nobody ever visited, full of artifacts from the old days. We set it up in my office, away from prying eyes and ears. The wax cylinders were fragile, but most were still playable. The first recording was my grandfather's voice, younger than I'd ever heard it, full of the authority that came with the badge. September 5th, 1947. This is Sheriff Eugene Thibodeau. I am documenting the testimony of those who have returned from what the old folks are calling the collection. The state police have ordered me to cease investigation, but I believe future generations will need this information. Then another voice, female, young. My name is Adelaide Broussard. I was taken on August 15th. I remember walking into the water, not being pulled, not forced, walking like it was the most natural thing in the world. The singing woman, she doesn't look like anything solid. She's made of sound and water and time. She showed us the true history of this place. Not the history in books, but the history in the mud, in the roots, in the bones of everything that's ever died here. Adelaide's voice continued describing things that made no sense but felt true in that deep, primitive part of the brain that remembers we came from water originally. Cities beneath the swamp that predated human architecture. Ceremonies that kept the land and water in balance. And always, always, the importance of recording, of remembering, of keeping the stories alive. The second cylinder was damaged, but we could make out parts of it. A man's voice, speaking French, then Creole, then something older. He was reciting names, hundreds of names, maybe thousands. Some I recognized as old Terrebonne Parish families. Others sounded Spanish, Native American, African, and some didn't sound human at all. The third cylinder made Bo step back and cross himself. It was singing, the same singing we'd heard in the background of Tyler's recordings, but clearer, more direct. It wasn't quite music as we understand it. The tones didn't follow any scale, the rhythm wasn't regular, but it was hypnotic. I found myself leaning closer to the phonograph, wanting to hear more clearly, to understand the words that weren't words. Bo grabbed my shoulder. "Sheriff, your nose." I touched my face. Blood. My nose was bleeding, and I hadn't even noticed. We stopped the recording immediately. The journal continued with my grandfather's observations. September 20th, 1947. All 17 have returned. Physically, they appear unharmed. Dr. Lafitte can find nothing wrong with them, but they are different. They know things they shouldn't know. Young Adelaide Broussard speaks languages she's never learned. Robert Thibodeau, no relation, can predict the weather with perfect accuracy 3 days out. They all speak of recordings they must make, stories they must preserve. Most disturbing, they speak of the next collection. They say it will come when the waters are warmest, when the barriers are thinnest. They say it will be in the lifetime of my grandson. I have no grandson yet, but they speak as if it's already determined. I sat back in my chair, the weight of predestination settling on my shoulders. My grandfather had known. Somehow, he'd known that I would be sitting here, reading this, dealing with the same thing he had. The journal's final entry was dated October 31st, 1947. The returned have integrated back into their lives, but the community knows they're different. Some folks avoid them, others seek them out for their strange knowledge. Adelaide Broussard has begun painting complex, impossible geometries that hurt to look at, but that she claims map the true shape of the parish. Robert Thibodeau has started a fishing business that never fails to find the best catches, like he knows where the fish will be before they do. They gather sometimes, all 17, usually during the full moon. They stand in the water and sing the old song, the one from the recordings. When they do, things happen. The fog rises even on clear nights. Animals that should be extinct are seen in the swamp. The dead are reported walking, though no one will make official reports of it. I'm hiding these recordings for whoever comes after. The state police have classified everything, threatened my job if I continue investigating. But this will happen again. The singing woman told them so, and when it does, someone will need to know the truth, that this isn't a crime to be solved, but a cycle to be completed. The bayou remembers everything, and every few generations. It needs new voices to sing its memories back to it. My phone rang, breaking the spell of the past. It was Marie Guidry. "Sheriff, Tyler's back. He just walked out of the swamp casual as Sunday morning." Bo and I rushed to Marie's house. Tyler was sitting on the porch, muddy but uninjured, staring at the swamp with that same empty expression I'd seen on Josephine's face. His grandmother was holding him, crying, but he didn't seem to notice her presence. "Tyler," I said gently, "can you tell us where you've been?" He turned to look at me, and his eyes, God help me, his eyes reflected light like an alligator's. Not all the time, just when the angle was right. "Recording," he said simply. "We've been recording the true names of everything. Did you know Terrebonne Parish isn't really called that? That's just what you call it. Its real name takes 17 minutes to say properly and includes the sound of every creature that's ever died in its waters." "Tyler, your grandmother's been worried sick." He looked at Marie like he was seeing her for the first time. "Mama, you look older. How long has it been?" 2 weeks, baby. You've been gone 2 weeks." "No," Tyler said, shaking his head slowly. "No, it's been much longer than that. We've been recording for..." He paused, confusion crossing his face. "Time moves different down there, sideways sometimes. We recorded the founding of New Orleans, but also its ending. Both happened, happening, will happen." The FBI agents arrived then, having driven back from New Orleans when they heard about Tyler's return. Agent Donnelly immediately wanted to take Tyler for questioning, but I intervened. "This is still my jurisdiction," I said firmly, "and this boy needs medical attention before any questioning." We took Tyler to Terrebonne General Hospital, where Dr. Isabelle Hebert, whose own great-aunt had been one of the 17 in 1947, examined him. Physically, Tyler was fine. Better than fine, actually. His chronic asthma was gone. An old football injury to his knee had somehow healed. Even his acne had cleared up. "It's like his body's been reset to optimal health," Dr. Hebert said, confusion clear in her voice. "But Sheriff, there's something else. His brain scans. They show activity in regions that should be dormant, parts of the brain we don't fully understand the function of." "Is he in danger?" "I don't think so. If anything, he seems enhanced. But enhanced for what purpose, I couldn't say." Over the next 3 days, all 17 missing persons returned. Each walked out of the swamp at a different location, all unharmed, all changed. They spoke of their experiences with the same flat affect, describing impossible things as mundane facts. And the recordings on their phones continued to appear, even after they'd returned. I gathered them all at the community center against the FBI's wishes. They wanted to separate them, interrogate them individually. But I'd read my grandfather's journal. I knew this was bigger than a criminal investigation. The 17 stood in a perfect circle without being told to, their spacing exact despite not measuring. When they spoke, sometimes one would start a sentence and another would finish it, like they were sharing thoughts. "The collection is nearly complete," Amy Dupuis said. "3 more recordings, then the cycle closes," continued Robert Hebert. "The water will rise, but not to destroy," added Josephine. "To remember," Tyler finished. "Every flood is just the bayou trying to return to its original shape before humans changed it." Agent Donnelly stepped forward. "You're saying you can predict floods?" The 17 turned to look at him in unison, the synchronization eerie. "Not predict," they said together, their voices harmonizing in that impossible way. "Remember. The water remembers everything, every storm, every flood, every drought. We're just helping it organize its memories." I thought about all the recordings, all the stories they'd been telling into their phones. You're creating an oral history of the bayou, but not from the human perspective. Tyler smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him since his return. "Exactly, Sheriff. Your grand-père understood. He was one of us after all." "One of you?" "One of the collected. It changes you, being part of the song. You carry it forever, pass it down. Why do you think the Thibodeau family has been sheriff here for so long? The bayou needs someone who understands to stand between the two worlds." That night, I went home and found something I'd never noticed before. In my grandfather's old desk, which had been my father's and was now mine, there was a hidden compartment. Inside was another wax cylinder and a note. "For my grandson Claude, when the time comes, the collection must be completed, but it must also be contained. You are the bridge. You must ensure both worlds survive the recording. The water will rise on the 3rd night after all 17 return. Be ready." Eugene Thibodeau, 1962. 15 years after he'd dealt with the collection, my grandfather had left this for me. I'd been born in 1963. I played the wax cylinder. It was my grandfather's voice, but older, wearier. "Claude, if you're hearing this, then the 17 have returned. You have 3 nights before the water rises. Not a flood like you know. The water will rise into the air, into the trees, into dreams. The boundary between the bayou and everything else will dissolve for 1 night. During that time, the final recordings must be made. The collected will sing the old song, and new voices will join them. Some will choose to stay in the water world. Others will return. Your job is to make sure those who want to return can find their way back. The singing woman isn't evil, Claude. She's necessary. She's the memory of this place, going back to when it was all one vast water, before the land rose, before the separations. Every culture has a flood myth, because every culture remembers when the waters covered everything. Here in the bayou, that memory is strongest. The singing woman keeps it alive, keeps the balance between what was and what is. On the 3rd night, gather the 17 at the old cypress grove. You know the one, where we used to fish when you were a boy. Bring recording equipment, modern equipment, not these old cylinders. The song must be preserved in whatever medium the current generation uses. That's part of the collection, updating the format of memory. And Claude, some people will be drawn to join them. Don't stop them if they truly want to go. The water world needs new voices every generation, just as our world needs those who remember. The hardest part of your job will be knowing when to let go. I sat in my office until dawn, listening to the rain that had started around midnight. Not a storm, just a steady, patient rain, like the sky was practicing for something bigger. Through my window, I could see the 17 gathered in the parking lot, standing in the rain, faces turned up to the sky, mouths open like they were drinking in more than just water. The second day after their return, the 17 began to change more noticeably. Their eyes developed a film, like a nictitating membrane you see on alligators. They could stay underwater for impossible lengths of time. Robert Hebert was clocked at 43 minutes during an impromptu test by the FBI. Most disturbing, they started speaking in harmony without meaning to, their voices layering into that singing even during normal conversation. Agent Donnelly wanted them quarantined. Agent Santos wanted them studied. But I knew from my grandfather's journal that trying to contain them would be like trying to contain the tide itself. "Y'all don't understand," I told the federal agents in my office. "This ain't a disease or a crime. It's something that's been happening here longer than Louisiana's been a state, longer than America's been a country." "Sheriff Thibodeau," Agent Donnelly said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "We have 17 American citizens who are missing and have returned with unexplained physiological changes. They're talking about floods, about people choosing to live underwater. This is clearly a mental health crisis, possibly brought on by some unknown toxin in the swamp." "Then explain the recordings," I challenged. "New ones appearing on phones with no power, locked in evidence." He couldn't. Nobody could. But that didn't stop them from trying to impose federal authority on something that predated the very concept of federal anything. That afternoon, 3 more people walked into the swamp. Not disappeared, walked. In full view of their families, fully conscious, fully aware. They just walked into the water and didn't come back up. The first was Adelaide Broussard. Not young Adelaide who'd been taken in 1947, but her granddaughter, also named Adelaide, who was 73 years old and had terminal cancer. She left a note. "Grand-mère always said the water could heal anything if you were brave enough to breathe it. I'm ready to be brave." The second was a 10-year-old boy named Marcus DuPont, who'd been deaf since birth. His mama said he woke up that morning claiming he could hear singing, the most beautiful singing, coming from the swamp. She tried to stop him, but he slipped away during lunch and walked straight into Bayou Black. The third was Deputy Beau Melanson. I'd sent him home the night before, told him to get some rest, but his wife called me around 3 p.m., hysteric. Beau had been standing in their backyard, staring at the retention pond behind their house, and then just walked in. She said he looked peaceful, even smiled at her before going under. I rushed to their house with a dive team, but the retention pond was only 6 feet deep and we could see every inch of the bottom. No Beau. His wife showed me his phone, a new recording in his voice. "Sheriff, I'm sorry, but I've been hearing it my whole life, that singing. My mère used to tell me stories about the water people, the ones who chose to go back to the old way. I thought they were just stories. But when I heard those cylinders, when I heard that song, I recognized it. I've been dreaming it since I was a child. The 17 need witnesses from our side. They need someone to record from a different perspective." I volunteered. The FBI wanted to drain the pond. I had to physically stand between them and the excavation equipment they'd brought in. "You drain that pond, you might kill him," I said. "Wherever he is, he's alive, and he chose this." "Sheriff, you're talking about people breathing water. That's physically impossible." So's recordings appearing on dead phones, but here we are. That night I couldn't sleep. I drove out to the old cypress grove my grandfather had mentioned, the place where we'd fished when I was young. It was a sacred spot, the locals said, where the Homa Indians used to perform ceremonies. The trees were ancient, their knees rising from the water like prayers made of wood. The 17 were already there, standing in the water up to their waists, humming that alien harmony. As I watched, the water around them began to glow. Phosphorescent plankton, maybe, or something else. The glow spread outward in ripples, and where it touched, I could see through the water like it was glass. And there were people down there. Not corpses. People. Walking on the bottom of the bayou like it was dry land. I saw Beau, his uniform replaced with something that looked like it was woven from Spanish moss and fish scales. I saw Marcus, the deaf boy, conducting a chorus of people I didn't recognize. Some were dressed in modern clothes, others in styles from decades past. A few wore what looked like Native American regalia, and some wore nothing but the water itself, shaped into almost human forms. Mon Dieu, I breathed, and Tyler heard me. Sheriff, he said without turning around. Tomorrow night the water rises. Your grand-père left instructions, didn't he? How did you know? He's down there. Tyler pointed to the water. Eugene Thibodeau. He's been waiting. He says you're doing good, but tomorrow will test you. Some will choose water, some will choose land. You have to let them choose. Tyler, what happens to those who go into the water? Where do they go? Tyler turned to look at me, and in the phosphorescent glow, I could see straight through his eyes into something vast and ancient behind them. They go home, Sheriff. To the first home. Before we crawled onto land, before we grew lungs, we were water things. The singing woman, she remembers. She keeps the door open for those who want to return. It's not death. It's just a different kind of life. And the recordings? Stories have to be told, Sheriff. History has to be remembered. But not just human history. The history of the water, the land, the things that existed before words. We're translating it into sound because that's what you can understand. But down there, stories are told in currents, in temperature changes, in the dance of sediment. I thought about all the missing persons cases that were never solved in the parish. All the people who'd vanished into the swamp over the generations. How many are down there? Thousands, Tyler said simply. Going back to before the French, before the Spanish, before anyone kept count. Every culture that's lived here has contributed voices to the song. That's why Louisiana sounds like nowhere else. We're singing with the voices of the drowned, the chosen, the remembered. The next day, the third day, dawned strange. The air was thick, thicker than usual even for Louisiana summer. The barometric pressure was wrong. My joints ached like a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. Animals were acting spooked. Every dog in the parish was howling. Birds flew in circles, confused. The gators had all gone deep, invisible even in the shallow waters where they usually sunned. The FBI had called in more resources. The National Guard had been quietly mobilized. They thought they were dealing with a mass hysteria event, maybe a suicide cult. They had no idea what was really coming. I spent the day preparing. I gathered every recording device I could find. Digital recorders, cameras, phones, even an old reel-to-reel I found in the evidence room. If my grandfather was right, the song needed to be preserved in modern formats. I also prepared boats, ropes, flotation devices, anything that might help people who wanted to come back find their way. As the sun set, the 17 began walking toward the cypress grove. They didn't coordinate, didn't communicate, just all started moving at the same time. The FBI tried to stop them, but anyone who touched them got shocked. Not electrically, but something like it. Agent Donnelly grabbed Amy Dupuy's arm and immediately let go, his hand covered in what looked like fish scales that faded after a few seconds. I convinced the feds to just follow, to observe. We formed a procession, the 17 in front, then law enforcement, then townsfolk who'd been drawn by something they couldn't explain. By the time we reached the grove, there were maybe 200 people there. The water was already wrong. It stood higher than it should, defying gravity, forming walls of water that held their shape without falling. As the 17 waded in, the water rose to meet them, wrapping around them like a living thing. And then the singing started. Not just from the 17, but from the water itself. Every voice that had ever joined the singing woman's chorus, all harmonizing in a language older than human speech. The recording devices I'd brought all turned on by themselves, capturing something that shouldn't have been able to be captured. The water rose, not flooding, but lifting. It formed columns, arches, impossible architecture made of liquid. And in that water architecture, we could see the other side. The bayou as it existed in the water world. Cities of shell and bone, markets where the vendors were half human, half fish, roads that were currents, buildings that were whirlpools. "Now," Tyler said, his voice carrying despite the overwhelming song. "Choose." And people did. Adelaide Broussard's granddaughter stepped forward, her cancer-ravaged body straightening as she entered the water. She looked back once, smiled, and dove into a column of water that was flowing upward. We watched her transform, not into something monstrous, but into something graceful. Her body elongated, her skin took on a pearl-like sheen, and she swam up the column and disappeared into whatever existed on the other side. Marcus's mother brought him forward. He was already changing, gills opening on his neck. She kissed him goodbye and let him go. He ran laughing into the water, and we could hear his laughter echoing even after he'd disappeared beneath the surface. But not everyone chose water. Of the 200 people there, maybe 30 entered the water world. The rest of us stood witness, recording, remembering. Beau appeared in one of the water columns, looking healthier than I'd ever seen him. He was recording too, holding something that looked like technology but made of coral and electricity generated by electric eels. He waved at me, mouthed, "Thank you," and then turned to document something behind him. A ceremony, maybe, or a celebration. The singing reached a crescendo, and then something vast rose from the center of the grove. The singing woman. She wasn't a woman, really. She was a suggestion of femininity made of water and sound and time. Ancient beyond measure. Beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful. Terrible in the way the ocean is terrible. She had no face, but somehow she was looking at each of us. Into each of us. When she spoke, it wasn't in words, but in pure meaning that our brains translated into language. The collection is complete. The stories are preserved. The balance is maintained. In another generation, when the waters warm beyond measure, when the land forgets its shape, we will call again. Some of you will remember this night as a dream. Others will carry it as truth. Both are correct. The bayou remembers everything, dreams and truth alike. She turned to me specifically, and I felt the weight of generations of sheriffs who'd stood where I stood. Guardian of the threshold, keeper of the peace between worlds, your line has served well. Continue to stand between, to translate, to protect both shores. The recordings will help others understand when the time comes for understanding. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The water fell back to its normal level. The 17 stood in the grove, looking dazed, but satisfied. The 30 who'd chosen water were gone, but their families could feel them somehow, knew they were alive, just elsewhere. The FBI agents stood slack-jawed, their equipment having recorded everything but their minds struggling to process it. Agent Donnelly looked at me with a mix of fear and awe. What do we tell Washington? The truth, I said. That there was a mass hallucination event caused by swamp gas, that the missing persons cases are closed, bodies non-recoverable, that Terrebonne Parish should be monitored for similar events but is currently stable. That's not the truth. It's the truth they can handle. The real truth? That's in the recordings, for those who need to know when they need to know it. The aftermath was harder than the event itself. How do you go back to normal after watching 30 people, including your deputy and 3 children, choose to live underwater? How do you write reports that satisfy federal agencies while protecting truths that would either be dismissed as insanity or trigger investigations that could destroy the delicate balance between worlds? The 17 who'd been collected stayed for another week, helping us understand what had happened. They were different now, more human than they'd been immediately after returning, but still carrying something otherworldly in their eyes. Tyler Guidry spent hours with me, translating the recordings into something approaching comprehensible narrative. The recordings ain't just history, he explained as we sat in my office, listening to playback that sounded like whale song mixed with jazz funeral. They're instructions, blueprints. The water world, it ain't separate from ours. It's the same space, just experienced different. Like how a fish and a bird can be in the same place but live in completely different worlds. But Bo, the others who went under, they're breathing water now? They're breathing, period. Water, air, it's all medium for oxygen. Their bodies changed to process it different. Evolution in reverse, or maybe sideways. Tyler pulled out his phone, showed me a video that shouldn't exist. It was Bo, clear as day, standing in what looked like a courtroom made of cypress root and mud, presenting evidence in a case. He's still a deputy sheriff, just for a different jurisdiction now. The FBI took thousands of hours of recordings with them when they left. Agent Donnelly pulled me aside before they drove off. Sheriff Thibodeau, I've been with the Bureau for 15 years. I've seen things that don't make it into official reports. But this is beyond classification. What do you suggest I do? File it under unexplained phenomena. Reference the 1947 incident if you can find those records, and recommend minimal federal intervention. The parish has been handling this for generations. We'll continue to handle it. And if it happens again? When it happens again, I corrected. My family will still be here. We'll still be the bridge. He shook my hand, and I could see in his eyes that he'd be back someday. Not as an agent, but as someone seeking answers to questions he couldn't stop asking. Agent Santos left her card. On the back, she'd written, "The water remembers everything. Some of us are just learning to listen." I had a feeling she understood more than she'd let on. The families of those who'd chosen water handled it different ways. Some mourned as if their loved ones had died. Others celebrated as if they'd moved to a foreign country for a better life. Marcus's mother started leaving recordings on her phone for him, telling him about her day, singing him lullabies. She swears he responds sometimes, that she finds recordings on her phone she didn't make, of him telling her about learning to sing in frequencies humans can't normally hear. Adelaide's family had the strangest reaction. Her daughter brought me a painting Adelaide had done in 1952, 5 years after her return from the first collection. It showed the cypress grove, the water rising, and in the background, barely visible, the figure of an old woman walking into a column of water. The face was clearly Adelaide's, but Adelaide as she would look at 73, dying of cancer, choosing water over suffering. She knew, her daughter said. Grand-mère knew her whole life that Adelaide would go back. She painted it before I was even born. The recordings themselves became my obsession, not just the new ones, but the old wax cylinders from 1947 and others I found dating back even further. The Terrebonne Parish Historical Society had recordings from the 1920s that no one had ever properly cataloged. I found a diary from 1863 describing the same phenomenon, 17 people walking into the water during the Civil War, when the parish was distracted by larger conflicts. 3 months after the collection, I got an unexpected visitor, Dr. Camille Fontenot from LSU's anthropology department. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of sharp intelligence that saw through bullshit immediately.
"Sheriff, I've been studying the recordings you sent to the university," she said, sitting across from my desk. "I've also been studying similar phenomena worldwide. The siren stories from Greece, the Slavic Rusalka, the Scottish Kelpies. They're all describing the same thing. Points where the boundary between water and air-breathing life becomes permeable."
You're saying this happens other places?
Different versions of it. But Louisiana, particularly this parish, seems to be unique in its regularity and its civility. Most water-being interactions in folklore are violent. Here it's cooperative, symbiotic even. She pulled out a map, marked with dots around the world. These are all locations with similar stories, but look at the concentration here. The Louisiana coast was covered in dots, with Terrebonne Parish being the densest cluster. "Why here?" I asked. "My theory? This is where the Gulf meets the continent in the most gradual way. The boundary between land and water is blurriest here. Miles of marsh that's neither fully land nor fully water. The whole ecosystem is liminal. That makes the other boundaries thinner, too." She helped me establish what we came to call the archive, a collection of all the recordings, properly preserved and cataloged. We set it up in the old evidence room, climate-controlled now, with copies stored digitally and physically in multiple locations. The 17 helped, their enhanced memories able to recall details that helped us organize the recordings chronologically and thematically. Tyler became my unofficial liaison with the water world. He could still hear them, the ones who'd gone under. Through him, we established a kind of communication protocol. Families could leave messages that Tyler would somehow transmit. Responses would appear as recordings on phones, always at 3:33 a.m. 6 months after the collection, something unexpected happened. 3 of the 30 who'd chosen water came back. Not permanently, just visiting. They walked out of the bayou on the full moon, looking exactly as they had when they'd entered, except for the eyes. Their eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever. They couldn't stay long, they said. A few hours at most. But they wanted their families to know they were happy. They were whole. They were part of something vast and beautiful. Bo was one of them. He found me at the station, dripping bayou water that never seemed to actually get anything wet. "Sheriff," he said, and his voice had harmonics now, like multiple versions of him speaking at once. "I need to show you something." He led me back to the cypress grove, and at the water's edge, he pulled out what looked like a recorder made of polished driftwood and mother-of-pearl. "The water world has its own archives," he said, "going back to when the first humans settled here, and before. The singing woman wants to share them with you. Trade, she calls it. Your stories for ours." He played the device, and I heard history from a perspective I'd never imagined. The founding of New Orleans from the point of view of the displaced water. The Civil War battles that poisoned whole sections of swamp. The oil spills that were like plagues in the water world. But also the joys. The celebrations when the rivers ran clean. The births of hybrid children who could exist in both worlds. The ancient treaties between the Homa and the water people that white settlers never knew about. "This is just a sample," Bo said. "There's so much more. Thousands of years of memory. But it needs to be translated, interpreted. That's why the collection happens. To refresh the translation, to update the language of memory." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because the next collection won't wait a full generation. The waters are warming faster than expected. The boundaries are getting thinner. Maybe 20 years, maybe less. Your successor needs to be prepared." "I don't have a successor. I don't even have kids." Bo smiled, and for a moment he looked fully human again. "You will. A daughter. She'll be sheriff after you. She's already chosen, just not born yet." Before I could ask more, he walked back into the water, disappearing between one step and the next.
A year later, my wife Caroline told me she was pregnant. We'd been trying for 10 years, had given up hope. But somehow, after the collection, it happened. Our daughter was born during a thunderstorm that flooded half the parish. The nurse said she'd never seen a newborn so calm during such chaos. She just stared at the rain against the window like she was listening to a familiar song. We named her Melody. Melody Thibodeau, future sheriff of Terrebonne Parish, keeper of the threshold, guardian of the archives. The recordings continue. New ones appear regularly now, not just from the collected 17 or the 30 who chose water, but from others. People who've always heard the singing but never understood what it was. Children who dream in languages that predate human speech. Elderly folks who remember stories their grandparents told about the people under the water. I catalog them all. Every story, every song, every impossible memory. Because that's my job now. Not just to keep the peace between the human residents of Terrebonne Parish, but to maintain the archive that proves we were never the only residents here. The FBI classified the whole event, but classification doesn't mean erasure. The recordings exist. The evidence exists, and more importantly, the connection between worlds exists, growing stronger each year as the waters rise and the boundaries thin. Tyler tells me the 17 are starting to hear new songs, different frequencies. The singing woman is preparing for something bigger than a collection, something about the waters, not just rising, but reclaiming. Not violently, but inevitably. The same way water always finds its level. Will humanity survive? I asked him one evening as we stood by the bayou, watching the sun set over the cypress trees. Humanity? Sure, but maybe not the way you're thinking. Evolution ain't always about moving forward. Sometimes it's about remembering what you were before you forgot how to breathe underwater. I think about Bo sometimes, down there in his underwater courthouse, still serving and protecting, just in a different jurisdiction. I think about Marcus, the deaf boy who can now hear frequencies no human ear was designed for. I think about Adelaide, painting prophecies in the water world, just as her grandmother had painted them on land. And I think about my daughter Melody, now 5 years old, who sometimes stands at the edge of the water and hums songs I don't recognize. Caroline wants to move, wants to take her somewhere landlocked, somewhere safe. But I know there's no running from what's coming. The waters will rise everywhere eventually. At least here we have guides. We have the archives. We have the songs. The recordings are all stored now in multiple formats, multiple locations, physical and digital, on land and somehow also beneath the water. Bo figured out a way to encode them in coral growth patterns, in the migration routes of fish, in the very DNA of certain bacteria that thrive in the brackish boundaries between salt and fresh water. The story will survive, Tyler assured me. Even if the form changes, the story continues. Late at night, when the sheriff's station is quiet and the only sound is the hum of air conditioning fighting the Louisiana heat, I listen to the recordings. All of them, in chronological order. From the earliest wax cylinders to the latest digital files. And if you listen to them in sequence, if you really pay attention, you can hear it. The meta-narrative, the larger story being told. It's not a story of invasion or replacement. It's a story of reunion. The land and water were one once, before the great separations, before consciousness divided things into categories like us and them, wet and dry, human and other. The singing woman remembers that unity. The collections are her way of keeping that memory alive, of maintaining the possibility of reunion. In 2019, 17 people disappeared into the bayous of Terrebonne Parish. They all came back, changed, but alive. 30 more chose to go under, to breathe water, to join the song. They're still there, still alive in their way, still part of the larger story being told in currents and tides. The next collection will come sooner than expected. The waters are warming, the boundaries thinning, the song getting louder. When it happens, Melody will be old enough to understand, maybe old enough to help. She already knows more than she should, already hears more than most. But that's how it is in Terrebonne Parish. We live between worlds, between water and land, between memory and forgetting. We keep the archives, maintain the recordings, guard the threshold. Not because we're special, but because someone has to. Someone has to stand witness when the boundaries blur. Someone has to translate between those who breathe air and those who breathe water. Someone has to remember that we all came from the water once, and maybe, someday, we'll all return. The recordings are there for those who need them. For those who hear the singing and don't understand. For those who dream of breathing water and wake up gasping. For future generations who'll need to know that this has happened before and will happen again. The bayou remembers everything. And now, thanks to the recordings, so do we. End recording. Sheriff Claude Thibodeau, Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana, December 2019. Archive note. This recording is one of 3,847 currently stored in the Terrebonne Parish collection. For access to additional recordings, approval must be obtained from the current threshold guardian. The water continues to rise. The song continues to play. The archive continues to grow. Some stories never end. They just go deeper.